I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Adam Lotinga. Adam, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Miki Travel, please?
Okay, Miki Travels, we've been running now for just over 53 years. We started in 1967, and the company was started post-Olympics by Mr. Nakanishi. He worked for Thomas Cook's at the time, and this was after, as I said, the Tokyo Olympics, and so he wanted to open up the Japanese market, and he started Miki Travel from very small beginnings at that time. I joined in 1982 in London myself, and after 2 years there, I had been living in Japan previously and said I wanted to return to Japan. So the company agreed to re-employ me back in Japan, not as an expat, but as a local employee, which is very interesting and very good experience. So I did 4 more years with Miki in Japan, and then returned in 1988, and then just continued to work my way up the company from that time, and enjoyed 99% of the time ever since.
And you're now managing director of the really the London office, which controls most of Europe. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, we have a network of offices all over Europe. I mean, globally, we have about 39 offices. Many of those are in Europe, and the European offices do quite a lot of the purchasing other than the hotels themselves, guides, local restaurants, coaches, etc. And of course, they coordinate the tours during the stay in that particular country. In addition, obviously, to London, we have around 350 staff in London, with about 1,500 globally. So outside Europe and London in particular, the main centers are in Japan, Hong Kong, and all around Asia, where we have sales offices. So as I said, about 1,500 people altogether.
And so I imagine your principal market is obviously Japan. Which other markets do you bring people in from?
Well, we started with Japan. Obviously, Mr. Nakanishi himself was Japanese, and we started really focusing on the inbound Japanese group market into Europe. So that was our core business at that time, and that's remained ever since. We subsequently expanded to handle FITs as well, and of course that's grown enormously. And then ultimately we decided to to open offices, sales offices throughout Asia gradually, and cover the whole Asian market, the Far East and Southeast Asia. Hong Kong is our hub there, but we have offices in Bangkok, Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, Beijing, Shanghai, etc. So we cover all of the Far East and Southeast Asia now, and obviously those markets are very much the growth markets of the future. Japan is a very mature market already, so it's difficult to see the Japanese group segment continuing to increase. So we're trying to consolidate our very considerable share of that, but at the same time focusing very much on growth out of Asia. With China obviously being one of the key focuses, but China obviously is slightly less profitable, high volume but less profit. So we obviously have to have the right balance. So we focus very much on MICE as well as regular sightseeing groups.
And I appreciate that that's the case. I mean, are there any challenges? I mean, obviously groups are where, to put it crudely, groups are where the money is, because obviously you get up to 48 people with one booking. But I mean, are there any?
Well,
yeah, I agree. I think we'll have to assume that for the purposes of the first half of this conversation, that things are normal. Nothing could be more abnormal than the current situation, but just assuming that things are fairly straightforward. Groups conventionally is where the money is. But FIT has its own challenges. Are there any particular challenges dealing with FITs, both in terms of purchase and in terms of supply? I'm thinking in terms of the moves by hotel groups at the moment to move away from net rate allocations, and also the strictures of demands in the market, where there are various provisions in consumer law which make things difficult. Is that true, or is it all plain sailing?
No, there are specific challenges. Obviously, the group segment out of Japan, as I said, is probably just about at its peak, certainly in the long haul area. With the individual market, then clearly there are challenges. There's been a major shift in the industry, as everyone's aware, over the last 5-10 years. And that's likely to continue probably. I mean, it's difficult to see what the implications of the current COVID-19 pandemic will be long term, but clearly suppliers have been looking to take back direct control of their pricing, of their distribution, etc., which is understandable. I think that the group segment, as you say, has been profitable in the past. Clearly, it depends on the number of groups. Or the size of the groups rather. Notwithstanding the challenges, obviously the advantage of the FIT segment is that so much can be automated, whereas the group segment is obviously quite labour intensive, whether it be from the purchasing through the reservations, operations, right down to the finance and accounting side. Whereas with FIT, obviously based on allocation, or free sale, whatever it happens to be, that can be a much more automated process. So I think very much the eyes of many companies are looking more towards the FIT segment as very much the future. Having said that, Asia, the growth in the group segment is still forecast to be quite phenomenal. So we're very much going to stay in there as well as in Japan.
I mean, I suppose on one level, what makes FITs popular is not just the fact that you can automate it, though that in itself has risks, but it's also scalable. Do you think you could, I mean, insofar as you can, with a limited investment, you can just see the numbers grow and grow and grow without any more input. Whereas with groups, it's a lot more complicated. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the means of purchasing, although they're changing, they've got merits as well as demerits. Obviously one is able to connect now dynamically with chains, and so long as there is availability there and at the appropriate price, then of course one can transact fairly easily. So I think it is quite scalable. The era of direct purchasing and allocations, etc., is not yet dead. There are many segments where that's still markets where that's still alive and kicking. How long, who knows? But yes, I think it is scalable, and I think the key, as with most businesses, is that one has to be adaptable and flexible and change as the market grows, as the market itself changes and consumer demand changes, whether that be for the type of product or how they purchase it or the experience on arrival.
Do you see any changes? I mean, putting this year and subsequent years aside, just looking back, I mean, you and I go back in this industry quite clearly some time. Is there been any big shifts in consumer behavior and I suppose appetite in the last 20 to 30 years that we look back? I mean, is the Japanese tourist of today very similar to the one that we had back in the 80s, or is it markedly different?
No, I would say it is quite considerably different. First and foremost, in the shift away from the traditional large groups all going around. Obviously, many of the Japanese have done the main cities in Europe now, and they're looking for different experiences. And I think experience is very much the key word nowadays. Most of the agents in Japan, and to a certain degree around Asia as well, what they're always asking for is something different now, something to differentiate their product from their competitors. So they want to they're looking for different types of accommodation, something which really separates out that hotel or accommodation, and different experiences. Certainly there's a lot more mono destinations popular these days. People want to spend a bit more time in country and explore the country in more depth, go beyond the major gateway cities. And I think also things like whether it be wine tasting or the food or cooking, they're looking for that sort of experience. And I think the Japanese market is probably somewhat ahead of the rest of Asia in that respect. but I think we can see similar signs developing out of Asia as well. So yes, it's inevitable that it will change. The Japanese are more willing to travel independently now, and we have our own product, Joy Bus, which is similar to a sort of hop-on, hop-off bus where people can go on certain itineraries and stay or extend their stay as long as they want, get on the bus and go to the next destination. And the buses will visit all the key sites along the way. So, you know, for example, getting to Alhambra Palace can be made much easier because you're on the bus, but you can decide then whether to stay another night and extend or do whatever you want. So it's a more flexible package still aimed at the FIT segment now.
Yeah, and getting to Alhambra is one thing, getting in the Alhambra is another, I suppose.
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah.
No, I mean that's fascinating. I mean, I remember one of my first jobs as a junior transfer rep back in the 1980s was to escort Japanese to and from the airport, and I was always awed at their ability to really treat everything as a camera safari, and everything was taken, everything was photographed that was of even remote and unusual interest, including people collapsing in the street. It was an amazing experience for me in those days to come across a group of people who were hungry almost for anything that could be photographed. Now you're telling me it's something which is experiential, is the new phrase.
Yeah, I think it's changing. I mean, you know, certainly I lived, you know, I've lived 9 years altogether in Japan, and obviously when you go into people's houses, you meet people, you know, they're very interested in showing you the photos, etc., and sharing their experiences. And you know, obviously Japanese particularly known for taking photos of the food when it's nicely presented in different countries, etc. So it is very much part of their cultural background, I think. But with regard, so I think they're still very much into that, but they want the experience as well. And I think, well, as I said earlier, it's very much that the market is maturing. What they want to experience, what they want to do is changing and evolving, and I think that's a good thing. It's good for the market, and I think also just moving away a little bit from that mass everyone following the flag and the tour leader. And of course, it will be very interesting to see with the inevitable social distancing that's going to come in. That's going to reduce group sizes in the for the foreseeable future anyway. So that potentially pushes it further in that direction.
Well, I mean, you're seeing on to the next subject, and I think without you saying that, I think I can say that the inbound industry in Europe is facing enormous challenges at the moment. There is functionally no business, and it's very difficult to run a business when there is no business to conduct. I know a lot of people have been surprisingly busy unwinding all the preparations that they'd made for 2020. One of the saddest things is that so much work goes into programming an entire season, and then so much work has to be devoted to unwinding an entire season with the knowledge that there's no revenue coming from it. So this has been a really trying time for, I think, all our members, and I know yours will have been no exception. I think what we need to try and look at is just, I suppose, what you think the prospects are for recovery. I think the first thing to look at is, do you think there is any scope for movement in both the FIT and the small group sector in the last quarter of 2020 and the first quarter of 2021?
Well, we're already seeing movement in the FIT segment. We are getting bookings and they are increasing. Obviously, they're still at a very small percentage compared to the peaks. I mean, we're still only around 10% of previous levels. But there are definite signs that is improving. Having said that, of course, a lot of those are still within Asia, inter-Asia, or domestic in Asia. And you know, I think it'll be some time before they really start to venture long haul. But the FIT segment certainly is starting to move. Groups, I think, will take quite a lot more time. We're really expecting only a smattering of business until certainly the end of the summer, until the end of October, just a few groups here and there potentially. But the agents, particularly in Japan, they're very concerned about starting to invest, as you say, into the planning and particularly the cost of promoting, unless they're confident that there are going to be consumers out there buying the product. So timing, as always, is critical in this. And we certainly see some agents venturing back into the market from November onwards and willing to actually start shelling out money to promote those products. So I think November is likely to be November onwards is likely to be the earliest we see any sign of real pickup, and we're hoping that might quicken the pace a bit from January onwards. Obviously, for major returns, we're looking at next summer, but by major, I mean possibly still only around 50% levels. I think Japan especially will probably take a little bit longer. Certainly if the prices are available, then I think China particularly will potentially come back quicker. Obviously there are concerns and caveats around that. I think one of them is of course flight schedules. Another is the flexibility of suppliers, and of course if there should be second waves of COVID, and what the implications of that would be for people who have rebooked. So I think a lot of people are waiting to see what flexibility there will be on the market, that should they have to cancel again, will they be able to get a full refund? So I think probably looking longer term, certainly we're very confident that there will be a recovery. As a company, we're confident we're going to be able to ride out this storm. There's obviously going to be a lot of pain in that process, as there is for everybody. But we are very confident that we will get through it as a company and also as an industry. And but I think realistically, summer 2022 is the time we're expecting to try and really be back to pre-COVID numbers. And going forwards from that, in fact, by 2022, we're actually forecasting an increase in the Asian markets. So much more optimistic but in Asia, but then that's largely because that area is still on the upward curve anyway, whereas Japan has very much reached the sort of saturation point for long haul travel to Europe.
And I mean, this is the story of travel. Putting Japan on one side, which is a special case. The story of travel is that we're a growth industry, and you're in a growth industry catering to a growth market. So this is strategically sounds like a very good place to be. I'm more fascinated by Japan because Japan is an old friend of Europe. It's now a market which has been evolving since the 1960s, really since the early 1960s, indeed since the Olympic Games, which you alluded to at the beginning of our conversation. It's rarely that ETOA cites the Olympic Games as a positive moment in tourism. But I'm fascinated as to why it is that Japan, which still is a huge, it's got a very big population. It's one of the few 100 million plus countries in the world. It's an affluent country. It's one of the most affluent countries in the world. Why there appears to be a sort of slight petering out of hunger for Europe. Is there any particular reason for this?
No, I think as you alluded to there, that it's still the amount of the level of the population, the percentage of the population that does travel is still not that high if you compare it with European countries, for example. Obviously, part of that is proximity. It's much easier to travel abroad in European countries, even from UK, but certainly from mainland Europe. But I think I think it has reached a certain point, certainly with regards to Europe. I think that the Japanese are looking to a certain degree for different destinations. They are inherently quite adventurous travelers, although they have traditionally traveled in groups. Long ago, you also saw the intrepid individual Japanese traveler. So I think it will be interesting to see the destinations that they're going to, and we've actually expanded our sales. Whether it be to the Middle East or North Africa or other destinations as well, where we've perceived demand. So although I'd say that there's a certain saturation in the group market, as you say, it's still a very sizable market, a very loyal market, a very high spend market, and also a very welcome market, I think, in most cases, because of the nature of the people, the customs, the habits of the people. And it's very disciplined and high spend, as I said. So, like you, I think it's a very good friend of Europe, and I'm sure that the level will remain very good, but I think it just will be very limited as to how much further it can grow, especially obviously with some concerns. I mean, there has been, for example, pre-COVID, there were concerns about the air capacity. There was limited air capacity to Europe. So, and even where there was capacity, there was a trend by the airlines to reduce the amount of seats, the capacity of seats in economy class, for example, which obviously tends to be more used for the group segment. Mm-hmm. So I think, yes, they are looking elsewhere. They are looking for something different. But I do think it will maintain. I think they might shift away more to smaller groups or individual traffic, but I think the overall demand from Japan to Europe will definitely remain as they continue to grow in other destinations.
And do you foresee a change in the sort of pattern of demand? And some people are hoping, whether they're right to hope this, that you will see a shift away from city-based tourism to, for instance, rural-based tourism. I will hide my skepticism behind that question, but I'd be interested to hear your opinion.
Well, there's obviously, with places like Amsterdam and Barcelona, Venice, there's a lot of talk around that, and it's a very valid point, I think. I think certainly short term, yes, I think that there's likely to be in the immediate future maybe a feeling of greater safety if you're traveling more in rural or locations or in the mountains, whatever it happens to be. But personally, I think that the Japanese still come to Europe primarily for the culture, for the buildings, for the cuisine, for the history. And I think that any short-term trend away from those particular attractions, if you like, will be exactly that short-term. I think that there will be continued demand to go to these key destinations where they want these once-in-a-life opportunities to visit the Louvre or whatever it happens to be in Europe. So I personally think that those destinations and attractions will recover. But I think whilst people are so concerned about human contact, then of course then those could be impacted short term. I think there is also, I think there's a change in the world where people do want to enjoy nature more. I think obviously the lockdowns in many areas have perhaps heightened that appreciation and love of nature. So I think that will fuel probably that for a time and sustain that. But I do think that if you take beaches, for example, the Japanese can go to Hawaii, for example, or Guam or wherever. They can go there much more easily, much more quickly and cheaply than they can to Europe. So of course they don't come to Europe for the beaches. They come for the history. And whilst there are some fabulous, natural destinations and phenomena to visit outside in Europe, there are many of these elsewhere in the world as well. So I think the focus will ultimately remain on the museums and the history and the sightseeing, etc.
And that is Europe's USP. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
Well, Adam, thank you very much.